Okay, hello, my name is ScienceBeard, and I will be talking a little bit about this test article, which is called Ofsted Stuck Schools Keep Underperforming Staff by Catherine Lau on the 4th of May 2020. And apologies for the pronunciation of Professor Daniel Moyes' name. If that's not his name, I'm not doing it intentionally. If I'm getting it wrong, sorry. I'll try and do better next time. This quote could be seen as a bit of advice, and I will talk a little bit about how useless it is as advice and how much it feeds into the schools need to be accountable and their job is actually quite straightforward, and teachers are lazy and incompetent whiners who fear change, progress and self-improvement narratives, or should I say stereotypes. Yes, for some time now, Ofsted has not just been sitting there as a neutral observer of the teaching profession, but has been actively criticising the teaching profession in a really destructive way. One peak example was Sir Michael Wilshaw, a former chief of Ofsted, who famously said about relationships with staff that if anyone says to you that staff morale is at an all-time low, you know you're doing something right. What a prick. Moving on, this is about Professor Daniel Moyes, but just prior to this, I need to get my assumptions out of the way. So, my assumptions are that the reporting of what was said is accurate, and that the teachers in this context means qualified staff, because with the advent of academies, that is not necessarily a given anymore. Plus, anybody who works in a school is seen as a teacher, and is appreciated at least by the children as one. They don't draw a distinction. So there's some debate about about what qualifications are necessary and what they mean. Under Michael Gove, there was a wholesale assault on teaching. Teachers were Trotskyites, enemies of promise. Teaching degrees were worse than useless, etc., etc. In fact, Gove was so unpopular that my own union, who hadn't gone on strike ever, went on strike twice during his tenure as Education Secretary. What were Gove's qualifications? He had attended a school. Okay, moving on from that. So several strategies were tested then, such as troops to teachers. As an armed forces veteran, you can bring invaluable skills and experiences to the classroom by training to teach, and you could benefit from a tax-free bursary of £40,000. That's what it says on the government website. Teaching, the only profession where you can earn more training than you are likely to earn as an experienced professional, minus the fees. It also only applies to some subjects and some soldiers, i.e. those without a degree. So this is clearly based on the fact that some soldiers returning from war zones are A, looking for jobs, and that B, teaching is a natural occupation because, you know, discipline. So how many potential teachers were recruited? More than 1,000 as planned? Well, in 2014, for qualification in 2015, there were 41 recruits for January, and later in September, there were 61. So problem solved then. Plenty of teachers to go around. Nobody could accuse such a well-thought plan to be in any way aimed at deprived areas, right? Well, there's a paper by Charlotte Chatterton from the University of East London employing actual theory, academic theory, to evaluate this. She felt that it was part of a militarization of schools, or as I would call it, the shut up, sit down and shut up approach to teaching. A more recent study from Mark Price in the Journal of Education for Teaching says that ex-soldiers have a drive to serve and commitment to their new job, much like pretty much all new teachers I've ever met. But here's the kicker. Classroom discipline wasn't a transferable skill for these ex-soldiers. Really? Shocking. Children not doing as they're told? Throw them in the brig, I say. What, they don't care and you're being unfair? Also, there's no brig? Anyway, so how many teachers make the transition from training to teaching? In general, quite a few. In relative terms, there's somewhat of a failure rate, about 15 to 20%, which has been cited as proof that ITTs, initial teacher trainer providers, were not selecting the right people and failing to prepare candidates for real life in schools. But maybe government needs to look at how it advertises teaching, maybe. So here is what Ofsted say in short about their approach to all this, before we go any further. In the Education Inspection Framework, the word research literally is mentioned 150 times on about 40 pages. The research references run into 28 pages of references of at least 12 references per page, so around 336 publications. They also carry out and commission research, but the main aspect to anybody's argument here is that it should be easy to identify staff who contribute to the stuckness of a school. A quick search through the research publications on effective teaching yields two results. One, a review of the literature commissioned by the CFBT in 2014, and the book which Professor Moyes co-wrote. But spoiler alert, neither will tell you that they can identify good teachers, because even if you do everything which is required in the teacher standards, and that is what the Lit Review basically details, there is something quite unquantifiable about what makes a teacher good, and it varies from student to student. More on that later. Why would Professor Moyes have written an entire book about it if it was easy? Does the book contain instructions or some sort of form or for use in schools to definitely identify weak staff? Doubt it. To be honest, I haven't read it yet, but if it was the final word on identifying good teaching, they would A, have done better than half a $500 million educational experiment in the US sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and B, why haven't they sent it to all school leaders, teachers and stakeholders? Well, to be fair, I don't know, maybe they have. Gulf sent out Bibles at one time. However, in the research I mentioned, 5 approaches and 5 forms were used to evaluate teaching. This is the Bill and Melinda Gates research study in hundreds of schools with thousands of teachers, and they came up with bupkis. They found that the people evaluating lessons had to be retrained with standardized videos of lessons judged to be so and so good or not, and that they could not do this consistently. I will talk about the validity and soundness of lesson observations at a later point in a later video. So, what does stuck mean? Stuck means that you've got 4 inspections behind you in 13 years at less than good. So why 4 inspections? Nice number. The time period between inspections isn't constant. It very much depends on how you did last time. Failing schools are often re-inspected after a few months. Over 13 years, lucky for some, I guess. This seems a long time. Leadership is almost never constant over 13 years, yet leadership is considered very important by Ofsted, as we will see. What if you teetered on the brink from good to requires improvement? Remember that there are only 4 judgments: outstanding, which doesn't mean what it should mean, good, requires improvement, which is a basic fail, and inadequate, which is an outright fail. So good requires improvement and repeat for 10 years. Then you get your 4 Ofsted inspections below good, and that means that you're stuck school. And add into that mix that the overall judgment comes from your weakest category. So if you fail leadership, you get an inadequate in total, etc., etc. This is such a random criterion that it is puzzling that no follow-up was asked for or reported in the article, but maybe it was just based on the talk where no questions could be asked, or maybe nobody thought of asking that question. Talking about stuck schools is based on quite a lot of assumptions. I will just go through 4 here, okay? So, assumptions number 1, it is easy to find good quality staff. Number 2, it is easy to attract good staff to a stuck school. Your primary worry should not be to have a sufficient number of teachers in front of students. Number 3. And number 4, the leadership of stuck schools can identify good and inadequate staff, and then obviously take actions to remove them. This is the usual nonsense where judgments inform the characteristics of the school. See, this school has become unstuck. They must have chosen the right people, but this school is still stuck. They haven't chosen the right people. So, chicken egg, did you notice I swapped my slide around there slightly? Keeps wrong staff, so stuck school, or stuck school because they keep the wrong staff? If you think that's oversimplifying the situation, that's absolutely correct, but not from my side. This is what Ofsted say. Both types, stuck and unstuck, would have a fair turnover of staff. Turnover of staff in schools which are failing is always fairly high, as staff who can leave, and new staff are not settled in the school, which is a difficult process and takes time. If you think that teachers just teach and are getting to know the students and what works for them is just woo-woo, you basically think what the government think. From my own personal experience, I can tell you that changing school and having to establish your reputation all over again when the pupils are challenging is a pain. So let's have a look at number 1. The reality is that teachers still leave the profession for a number of reasons, and recently qualified teachers quit after a few years. Equally, for many reasons, they quit after about 5 years. Recruiting new staff is difficult in some circumstances. In my first school, which was a good school, I found that because of the cost of living, there weren't many applications. Even so, it's a fair bit easier when you are a nice middle-class school with fairly disciplined, well-looked-after pupils. There tend to be more applications for those jobs. Who wants to work in a challenging school when becoming an NQT, a newly qualified teacher, in their first year at school with an 80% timetable but with additional paperwork to do, which far exceeds that reduction, is already stressful. There are also recent articles about how among graduates, NQTs work 1 extra day in the week. But since this is subjective and is dismissed because it is self-reported and outside of teaching nobody trusts the workload argument, look at the holidays, I will not use that here. So, it is easy to attract good staff to a stuck school. So I'm not saying anything about the quality of School Dash. And I'm just taking the TES's research at face value that it is legit. But their conclusions are hardly mind-bending. Stuck schools are, or inadequate and failing schools, have more pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds, more teaching vacancies, and less likely to have full role. The last point basically means that they don't have as many pupils as they have capacity for. It also means they get less money and therefore cannot afford to pay either as many staff as their capacity would suggest or promote teachers when the opportunity arises. If you don't pay staff what they deserve, they will look for promotion elsewhere. If your staff number is reduced because your school isn't full up, then good luck finding the right staff just at the right time when you need them and when the capacity is full. This links back to teacher shortages and the fact that more positions go unfilled. Challenging schools, particularly those that are more isolated, will always have that problem of A, not being able to recruit, and B, having the pick of the crop. Instead, because of money, they will employ inexperienced or unqualified staff who are simply cheaper. A question was asked by Anna Turley of Redcar on the 20th of September 2017. And the question was basically to ask the Secretary of State for Education what estimate she has made of the proportion of the school's budget spent on supply teachers in Redcar and Cleveland, the North East and England in the last 12 months, for which figures are available. The answer was given with the data for 2015-16 in mind, but that probably has only gone up, if anything, since then. For 5,266 academies across England, the figure was a total of £17.1 billion spent on academies. And for 16,774 maintained schools, it was £27.7 billion. Supply accounted for 2.28% for academies and 3.26% for maintained schools. So in total, around £1.3 billion was spent on supply. If you assume a teaching salary of around £30,000, which is around M4, so that's in between sort of M1 and M6, you can get there after about 5 years, when many new teachers quit. You could pay 43 full-time, reasonably experienced teachers with that money. Did I say 43? I meant 43,000. It is, of course, not as straightforward as that for many reasons, but there are around 500,000 teachers in the UK and the equivalent of around 40,000 teachers' salaries spent on supply. So why not save that expenditure, since the implication from Ofsted seems to be that it is better to have the right people rather than just anyone. Oh, right, because those people don't exist. Okay, so I'm slightly facetious here and putting words into Daniel Moyes' mouth, so sue me. He didn't say anything that would reasonably have been understood by the reporter as a solution to this conundrum. If it's assumed, I get to decide on the assumption. This is another piece of nonsense implied by Daniel Moyes and Ofsted, and I will debunk this with bigger and better research than Ofsted's own musings. It is a premise which is pretty much debunked by the circularity of Moyse's own reasoning here. And I've already started to show that with the stuck school keeps wrong staff slide. If a school hangs onto the wrong staff, and it knows as an institution that it does, then it should follow that there are a number of dilemmas for the school here. In addition, leadership is always getting the benefit of the doubt here. You have to assume that they are competent. So either it can't recruit staff that it knows would be better, or it can't afford to lose staff which aren't doing their job. However, the failing staff aren't doing it badly enough so that it would be unethical for the school to hang on to them. Unless, of course, the school is deliberately hanging on to staff that it knows are causing it to be judged as stuck. Now, either Ofsted believes that this is the case, in which case isn't the leadership failing because they're not recognizing that unsuitable staff are causing it to be stuck? In which way can the leadership then lift the school out of being a stuck school? And if the leadership is failing, would you trust it to identify failing staff honestly? This to me makes very little sense, and is just the kind of circularity which is used in victim blaming. If you got robbed, you must have displayed your riches. What do you expect? If you're a stuck school, just get rid of the failing staff. Of course, Ofsted is like a bad supervisor here, or bad boss. What you are doing isn't good enough. Do it differently. We won't patronize you by telling you how, of course. Why, it's obvious what you are doing is wrong. Can't you see that? So, if the leadership is incompetent, what makes you think that they can do a better job for the school? The safe approach would be to get rid of that leadership, surely. But this isn't what I'm criticizing here. My point is that you can't actually identify subtle differences in what makes a teacher requiring improvement or good, which I will talk about in another video. So at best, this is a load of circular nonsense. At worst, this is intellectual dishonesty. I'm not saying which I'm leaning towards, but Professor Moyse, here's my verdict in animation form. See you in the next video.